I know you're focused on the election today, but I need you to also focus on something huge happening tomorrow. In the morning, the United States Supreme Court is going to finally be forced to directly confront President Trump and his attempts to expand the power of the president when they answer the question, are President Trump's tariffs even legal? Two lower courts have already said no. But tomorrow, in perhaps the biggest test yet of Trump's power, the United States Supreme Court is going to weigh in. So tomorrow morning, the justices are going to hear oral arguments for 80 minutes in the combined cases of Learning Resources v. Trump and Trump v. VOS selections. These cases are being brought by U.S. importers in 12 different states who all argue that Trump's widespread tariff actions are hurting them financially by increasing their costs and disrupting their operations. They say Trump does not have the legal or constitutional power to just willy-nilly impose whatever tariffs he wants at whatever rate he wants on the entire world for as long as he wants. But Trump believes there is a national emergency and an unusual and extraordinary threat when it comes to the trade deficits and fentanyl. And because of those emergencies, he believes that he has every right to impose whatever tariffs he wants without the consent of Congress. And to justify this, he is using a law from the 1970s called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Well, in late August of this year, in a 7-4 ruling, the appeals courts said no. Trump does not have that power under the IEEPA law. They said the law gives the president the power to regulate importation during a national emergency, but the word tariff does not appear in the law once. The appellate judges said the law does not authorize the president to impose tariffs, duties, or taxes. They said the Constitution is clear. Those powers belong to Congress, period. Of course, Trump vehemently disagrees. He said that if the Supreme Court strikes down his unprecedented use of tariffs, it would be a total disaster for the country. He claims it would make the United States financially weak, and he has said this is the most important legal case the justices are going to hear this entire term. And he's even suggested that he's going to show up tomorrow at oral arguments. Now, whether he actually shows up, we'll have to wait and see. So how are the justices even going to decide this case? Well, before I tell you that, you need to understand, of course, in the past, presidents have imposed tariffs on certain countries or on certain industries or certain types of products. Congress has largely delegated tariff authority to the president because it can sometimes coincide with national security or foreign policy, which generally fall in the jurisdiction of the executive branch. But what makes Trump's tariff so different is the fact that he is taking this tariff policy into a realm we've never seen before. He put tariffs on literally every country in the world, and it's not like just a little tariff. In some cases, we're talking blanket tariffs on all imports of like 20, 30, 40%, depending on the country. And he imposes those tariffs on not only our adversaries, but even on our allies. Now, all of that is why these states and business organizations are suing. They argue Trump is taking this way too far. And they say if he wants to go this far, fine. But he has to have the approval of Congress first. So now let's talk about how the Supreme Court is going to decide this case. They're going to look at a lot of things. Obviously, they're going to look at the IEEPA law from the 1970s and whether it gives any president the power to use tariffs. They're going to look at whether this trade deficit is actually a national security risk, and they're going to look at whether there's an actual emergency. And if so, whether Trump can use that emergency to justify his significant tariff action. They're also going to look at the Constitution and the separation of powers, and they're going to look at whether Congress has clearly authorized the president to take an action like this that is of economic and political significance. It's a concept called the Major Questions Doctrine. Now, the Department of Justice has argued that the Major Questions Doctrine does not apply in this case because this is an emergency. They say the President of the United States, under his national security powers, should be able to take this type of sweeping action to protect the country, and the president should not have to go to Congress to do it. So far, all of the lower courts have disagreed and said, yeah, you do. So, what is going to be interesting tomorrow when the Supreme Court weighs all of these things is whether the conservative justices will apply the same standard to Trump as they did with President Biden, when President Biden was pushing the boundaries of his executive authority by using existing laws to do things like forgive student loans, and fight climate change, and issue a vaccine mandate for large businesses, which Biden argued at the time was an emergency. Back then, the conservatives on the court pretty resoundingly said, nah, Biden could not do any of those things without the approval of Congress. So we'll have to see if they treat Trump the same way tomorrow.